Hi, and welcome to Schema Stories. My name is Martha Van Berkel, and here we interview people who are thought leaders in the schema markup and structured data world. And today I'm absolutely delighted to welcome my co-founder, Mark Van Berkel. Welcome, Mark.
Hi, Martha.
So let's kick off and talk a little bit. Have you start by just telling us a little bit about yourself, a little bit about your background?
Sure. So I started off as a developer and spent a few years doing custom development. 2005 started a Master's of Engineering. So there I started to learn about semantic technologies way back in the day, I guess 13 years ago, and did a proof of concept for SAP Research Labs, which is really interesting, and kind of whet my appetite for getting into it. But we were a little early even in those days, of course, with the tools that were available. Spent a few more years doing consulting and other kind of IT projects, and then 2012 started the Hunch Manifest and started rolling there through some different ideas and eventually landed on the Schema App idea. So yeah, I guess by background, developer first, and was into technical team leads, architecture, really interested in the information architecture especially, and kind of the interplay between semantic
Excellent.
technologies and the rest of the world.
Fantastic. And so tell us, why did you build Schema App? Where did that come from?
Um, Good question. Well, while we started the business in 2012, I hadn't yet determined, or we hadn't determined what we're going to actually build and sell and what was going to take off. So we had tried a couple of ideas. One of the ones was in 2013. I had built a just kind of a little gadget which would help some of our marketing clients to help get found on the web, and it was specifically very narrow. We were looking at home and construction businesses, and this is back in 2013. So we were trying to create the kind of templates for schema markup and sort of put it in the hands of those people who need help getting found online. So that was the very early days, and it was just kind of an interest of mine. And but it was about a year later when I was at Semtech Biz conference in San Francisco, where there were a few different thought leaders again in kind of the intersection of semantic technology, and also SEO. So I believe Jay Myers from Best Buy was there, Barbara Starr, and some other person on the panel, and I'm forgetting who it was at this moment, but it was kind of an interesting intersection because they were even articulating how few people there were that lived at that intersection. So coming from the semantic technology background, I was like, oh well, this is something that's very interesting to me and something that we can work on. So it was from that I started we introduced a JSON-LD schema generator. So this was in 2014, but it was still a bit premature. So we were at a conference later, probably a year later, after that first one, I met Aaron Bradley at the conference, and he's like, "Oh, that's a great little tool." And he wondered, though, if Google was using it to reward companies with rich snippets, and the answer at that point was like, "No, I haven't seen evidence of that actually yet." But so we were a little early with the JSON-LD product. But from there, it was just kind of like Google then did support it, and then it was like, okay, well, it's game on. Let's really get this schema product and schema vocabulary into the hands of a lot more people. So like for me, it was just how can I make it a lot easier for adoption, where like marketers who maybe don't have the IT resources to build it into their site, how do we kind of start getting some robust schema markup into their hands? And then also for the experts, how do we kind of enable them to do the more complex things, but at a scale that is otherwise quite difficult to achieve. So to us, that's really where I think we're providing a lot of value, and where we continue to kind of build out our products.
Now, you kind of skipped over the fact that like you also built it for you to use, as you were sort of as we found ourselves as a digital marketing agency. Do you want to talk a little bit about sort of the challenges when you first started Schema Markup, and then we'll transition to talk about like some of the biggest challenges of doing it at scale?
Yeah, so we had a period of 2 years roughly where we were a marketing agency providing kind of SEO and email marketing strategies and services. Where this was like because it was something that we often recommended clients take a look at. We did want to include schema markup among their kind of tactics, and so for me it was kind of a productivity tool. How can I kind of generate the schema markup a little quicker? So at the time there was no generators out there, and there was one actually by Raven Tools, but it was very limited in its scope. So I wanted something for the whole vocabulary so I could more well describe all those businesses that we were doing marketing services for. So describing all of their services and all of the products with their additional attributes and properties, and all those things is where like the juicy details live, where you can actually really articulate something. And again, Google was moving quickly. They're introducing new features. So for us, it was a productivity tool. So how can I generate it and then also maintain it? Like there's a big part that's I think overlooked. Like it's great to generate and copy and paste code in, but what happens next month when the rules change or the vocabulary changes? Like what do you do to go back and update all that stuff? And I'm not really interested in doing a lot of maintenance, as my co-founder can attest. In terms of like doing work over and over again, I'm really happy to figure out how we solve it once in for a bunch of people, so that like now with kind of this database kind of generating tool, we can then actually query the data, update the query, or update the data on the fly, and kind of make the maintenance a breeze rather than having make it a pain and actually overlooked.
Talk to me a little bit. You talked a little about maintenance as being one of those big challenges when you're starting to do schema markup. More and more detailed as well as at scale. Can you talk a little bit more about sort of other challenges you've seen working with sort of global clients around doing schema markup at scale, and perhaps how you overcome those challenges?
So I guess like primarily like there's a bit of a divide between marketing and IT. Like marketing wants to adopt all of these tools, all these features, so that they can get the latest features from Google, and yet IT wants to be in control of the technology. They want to be the ones calling the shots and implementing, and sometimes there's a bit of a tension between the want to go fast and while also maintaining maybe the stability of the system and kind of maintaining like that, which IT does often and does well. So there's a bit of this tension, and so that's kind of one thing that we often deal with, is like how do we kind of like speak to the IT team with how they're still playing a role in the roles and different ways in which they may want to think about this. Like there's a whole life cycle approach to this. Like there's like probably 4 different steps to the life cycle of your schema markup. There's one about determining like what's your strategy, what are the things you're going to mark up, what are kind of the content things that you may want to adjust in your HTML. Secondly, there's the generating part, like how do you actually map the data that you have into the schema markup. Then there's also a reporting kind of aspect to this, like a third step. So like how do you know that, how do you measure that it's been implemented? How do you know like the depth or the breadth of your content and schema on your website? And then there's also like the reporting and the leveraging. So once you have all this schema markup, you can then repurpose it for analytics or repurpose it for chatbot. And there's all these other kind of add-on things, and this kind of expansion opportunity that IT doesn't look at. So they look at like the second step. Marketing might look at the first step, which is marketing might say, okay, here's what we want to mark up, and then IT says, okay, well, here's your generated code. But then and they wipe their hands and they're done. And so how does marketing kind of keep on top of the quality of that content? Is it kind of meeting the needs that they want, and are they actually then repurposing it to kind of make the best use of all this rich information? So that's kind of like I guess overall, like we see that over and over, that kind of this kind of pattern, or kind of maybe limited thinking in terms of the life cycle. But more specifically, like microdata for a long time has been the kind of method of choice. So adding properties within the HTML elements has been a great way for templating those repeated data items within a web page. But the challenge with that has been the maintenance again. So like designers might go in and adjust the display of the image, and they might forget to retain the item prop, and there goes your image feature for Google. And while marketing may also be wanting to get things in there, the kind of interplay of like the developer and the designer and the marketing team, like kind of like there's too many hands in the pot with microdata. So it's also has some challenges with all of those changing requirements and kind of the busy landscapes. And simpler, smaller teams, like maybe that's not a challenge. Maybe that person's all one and the same, and everything's hunky dory. JavaScript implementations are quite popular in the last year as well. But they're also not a golden bullet, I would say. It's just you take JavaScript. There's a couple different approaches you could use. I think predominantly they use like data scraping. So you use JavaScript to inspect elements on the page to determine, for some ID or some class within the HTML that's unique to the page, you grab that and then you pull it into the name of the product or the name of the article or whatever the case may be. But again, this is sensitive to changes in design. So if you're having a team that's maybe a bit distributed, either maybe the designers adjusted something again, or perhaps it's a third party that you have on that site which does reviews, and they put in widgets for all the reviews that thing has generated, or the aggregate score if they change something that can throw off your JavaScript. So again, you have to there's quite a bit of maintenance to it. So that's one of the challenges with JavaScript. And then there's also kind of like the Moody structured data testing tool that like month to month maybe works and maybe doesn't. And so like you have to really know whether or not your JavaScript implementation is valid. So checking to see if it's compliant with the Google bots. So that's Chrome version 41. So like making sure that like there's no JavaScript in there that's going to have a problem with that is going to help you to be assured that that Google is actually going to pick it up. And then there's other ones like the other consumers don't see it. So Google is great to be supporting all the rendered JavaScript, but Bing and some of the other ones do not provide that kind of level of quality for JavaScript support. So this is also kind of one of the challenges with JavaScript, but it's great to often, let's say, bootstrap things, because it's pretty. If you have a tag manager, it's pretty easy to set up and pretty quick to get done. The other solutions, I don't know, maybe templated JSON LD. So like if you have some sort of template for products or for articles, then you may want to have the developer create schema markup in a JSON LD block. So at least there, you're taking out the design of the page. You're just you have an information layer that you translate in schema markup, and you maybe have the marketing person who's asking for questions for changes in that schema markup. And that can take a couple of weeks though, or months of time before you have those cycles where the development team actually gets the changes implemented. And they're also, as a developer myself, I also had to learn the lesson that I'm not a schema expert. So even asking a developer just put schema markup in there doesn't mean it's going to be right, and it probably won't be unless they've also had their hand in the schema.org pot for a while to understand some of the best practices.
And so I'll just interrupt you here to say, like, does Schema App solve some of those problems? Like, is part of the reason you built it to try to look at the best of those worlds? Can you just speak briefly about that, since I want to also talk about schema ownership as another topic?
Yeah. So yes, we solve a number of those things. So especially the IT challenge. So we provide the marketing team the tools to be able to mark up these things without having to touch a line of code. So yeah, so like the time to change is much faster. They're able to deploy markup on a whole site within a couple of hours, even for big sites if it's templated. So yeah, our highlighter does quite a bit of the work for these large sites, and then also our editor is quite robust as well in creating the detailed markup that they may want to do. But then we also provide some of the add-ons that kind of bootstrap your get you up to like kind of a minimum level of quality for all your schema.org vocabulary on your site. So for WordPress, you can install our plugin, or for Shopify or add-on and things like that. And that's kind of like getting you to at least, I'll say, like table stakes. And then after that, we kind of want you to optimize even further yet. So we give them that flexibility. It's not bulletproof by any stretch of the imagination. Like maybe the designs could have an impact to how we roll out our schema markup. But as long as it's in the single hands or single control of one person, then I think it's at least something that can be solved.
Can you talk a little bit about schema ownership? And this is something I think that's starting to evolve in the market as we, even see the datacommons.org come out and talk about claim reviews, and even some of the releases we saw today about talking about how you can, like have your site crawled or URLs for job postings, or tell Google which sites have job postings. Can you talk a little bit about
Mm-hmm.
schema ownership, how you see that today, and then where you see that going?
Yeah, the recent stuff is all around the SD publisher and SD license, so structured data. I don't know why they abbreviated it, but it stands for structured data license, structured data publisher, I think it is. And so those are attributes you can put into your schema markup to say, I'm the owner and I license anybody under the Creative Commons, XYZ license to use this data. So this is definitely useful for instructing those consumers like Googlebot or Bing or, Yandex or Schema App or whoever to kind of like give them the instructions for how they want it to be used. So I think that would allow you to kind of open source your data. So if you want it to be kind of like really like shared through the data commons, you can include that publishing license to say like, yes, that's great. Like put all my data or put certain parts of my data into this kind of broader web repository, and I think that's just it's a very practical step for actually acknowledging the license or the of which you're sharing this information. So there's that kind of ownership of that data, but even within an organization, I think there's ownership like to questions sometimes like around who has the responsibility for that schema markup. Is this a question of like, is there a data architecture team, or is there a marketing function? Who owns that that schema quality and the schema, like quantity, even like who's responsible for the site wide? Maybe it's segregated by like sub-site, and I don't know if people really have a clear sense of who takes ownership for that in some businesses. Like I think often it falls to marketing, but like it's not really like a question we hear very often.
Very cool. Thanks for sharing. So one last question, and then we'll be out of time. So where do you see this evolving? Where do you see this going? Over the next, I'll say 1, 2, maybe 5 years.
So where are things going? Good question. So I guess with the segue from the last one is that data commons is kind of an interesting possibility. So today that has the claim review, and you can download all this basically schema markup from the data commons, and you can then kind of do what you want, use it to do some analysis to determine whether or not the claim reviews should be true and when they're actually stated as false, and kind of do some interesting add-ons from that. And I would say like this is probably an early signal of what is to come. So I really think there's the opportunity is in these kind of add-ons and other ways in which you can kind of look at your data. Like I have kind of a list of things that I'm thinking about, or things that I think we're starting to see emerge, and it's some things are not even new. Like it's just like maybe reimagine ways of doing things because now you have a common vocabulary for a lot of things in a lot of sites. So like it could be like there's been some talk for a couple of years around augmenting your analytics data with your business information or semantic analytics. So like how do you like kind of segment your data for your blog posts on your site by author or by tag or by category, and and to kind of provide additional insight as to which is the best performing types of content. Like this is, I still don't think that's got enough legs yet, and so that's got a long way to run because it's still kind of difficult to get set up. And what else? Like there's still things like if you have a knowledge graph on, like let's say if you've done a good job of your schema.org markup on your site, what else can you do with it? Like you could think of this as a data repository for informing a chatbot, for instance. Like this would be a very common one to I think that people can look at. So there's lots of interesting actions in the vocabulary. So maybe there's a potential action to read a white paper, for instance. Like if you have all your white papers or those downloadable things in a vocabulary, then you can then provide that over to some sort of chatbot or just a translation into some other consumers for that list of all the white papers. Or it could be other forms like contact forms. Like there's a bunch of different actions. Like today you have view actions and watch actions, like for different tools, and like we see a bit of the Google Assistant stuff helping you to link up with podcasts, and you can play like a podcast based on the schema markup. So why couldn't it be like a TV show or a video object? And why does it have to be limited to Google when Alexa's also coming around doing similar things? And or there's maybe your own experience. Like you could just repurpose that same information into your own internal assistant services or chatbots, like maybe through the Facebook chatbot infrastructure. And other things I've thought about are like different browser extensions, like ways in which like consumers can just kind of like leverage the schema markup, or maybe on-site search. The AdWords custom targeting, I personally haven't seen too much of that implemented, but I've heard people talking about it, and I think that it's kind of an interesting opportunity. Otherwise, like I should just mention generally of the schema.org community, like that vocabulary I'm sure it's going to continue to expand. Like we continue to see like 2 or 3 releases per year, so we're going to see more specific classes and enumerations, and maybe we'll see more extensions like the GS1, or maybe we'll actually get a definition of Google's own extension for the things that they keep putting out. But I think that can also be motivated by these other add-ons. So let's say the strategy could be driven by this kind of augmented analytics. So like knowing which content articles perform the best can inform your content strategy. And so maybe there's just a way to segment the data that you could expose with schema.org, but it's not in the vocabulary. So you may want to just create your own extension. And so I think that that's probably got a long way to go, but this is a good place to start. Yeah, otherwise I think I'd have to just add one more thing. Google is adding so many things that are interesting lately that it's going to be a lot of fun to see where Google continues to expand their feature set.
Excellent. Well, lots to think about. I feel like we could have almost a podcast or an interview on like each of those add-ons, sort of exploring, how else can you use your schema markup. So thank you, Mark, so much for joining us today. If people want to find you online, where should they look?
So I'm semi-active in a number of communities, including the Google Plus Semantic Search Marketing Group from Aaron and Yarno. So I participate there, but I also I'm on Twitter at Berkel, and I'm on LinkedIn, Mark Van Berkel, pretty easy to get. And yeah, through schemaapp.com, that's our main website. So and somewhere in there you'll find my handiwork as well.
Excellent. Yeah, Mark at schemaapp.com. Easy to find him. Thank you, Mark, for joining us today and for helping us understand where this is evolving to, and for sharing where Schema App started. Thank you for joining
Thank you.
Schema App Stories, and have a great day.